Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. I like to talk about history. I also discuss international law, and I'm a lawyer and I'm not an attorney. This video, I get to explain the difference between a lawyer and an attorney. This does not constitute legal advice, and I'm not your lawyer, right? That's a disclaimer. So I'm a lawyer, not an attorney. People often conflate the two terms, but they mean different things, right? Just understand this. All lawyers, right, are not, not all lawyers are attorneys, right? Or let me put it this way. All attorneys are lawyers, but not all lawyers are attorneys, right? All attorneys are lawyers, but not all lawyers are attorneys. So it just means that an attorney can do all the things that a lawyer can do, right? But a lawyer cannot do all the things that an attorney can do, right? So that means an attorney has more authority, more power, more ability than a lawyer, right? So a lawyer is limited. Now, I'll be able to also, the distinction will be more easily understood when I give the etymology of the two words, right? So they both have two different origins. Lawyer is actually derived from the Old Norse language, or from the Viking era, right? It entered English in the Middle English era. I've done a video discussing the origin of the English language, and attorney is derived from attorney, from the Norman French, Old French era, right, in the 13th century, when French was the language of the courts in England, right? It was a language of the courts, and of course, we know French is actually derived from Latin, right? Latin. French is one of the Romance languages. I actually did videos in which I was talking about the evolution of the English language. So you can understand the distinction between lawyer and attorney from the etymology. Etymology is like the history of words, right? The history or the study of words. So, but in order to just, so I don't shout, I don't cloud the meaning of the distinction between attorney and lawyer in this video, in a long video. I'm going to right away just state what the differences are, because somebody actually asked me, more than one person actually asked me the difference between a lawyer and an attorney just this weekend, over the weekend. And so I'm going to do that and hopefully get it out of the way. It's pretty simple. Again, all attorneys are lawyers, not all lawyers are attorneys. That sounds abstract. For me, it does. It seems pretty straightforward, but it might be straightforward for me because I'm trained in logic, I'm trained in words, and of course, I'm trained in the law. So, and that's what a lawyer actually means, right? A lawyer means somebody who's trained in the law. They have a law degree, just to keep it simple. In America, you have a JD, right? You have a law degree. Uh, where the distinction matters for us is in America, right? So you have a JD, that's Juris Doctor. Juris Doctor literally means, that's Latin. Juris means law, jurisprudence. That's short for jurisprudence. It means law, right? Doctor, Latin as well, just means doctor, right? A doctor of law, right? So that's a high level of like an advanced. Uh, Doctor also is Latin for scholar, right? A scholar, a teacher, right? That's really what it means. Many people don't realize it's entered our lexicon that a doctor is synonymous with a physician, right? That's how we've come to understand it. But a doctor, doctor, uh, a physician is a doctor in that he's a doctor of medicine. That's what it stands for, MD, medical doctor, doctor of medicine, right? So they've gone to train and received a degree in doctor of medicine. So they're an expert in medicine, medical medicine, right? And but they're a physician. So when you say doctor of something, that means you're a teacher, you're a scholar, you're highly learned, you receive training in something. And so that's what a lawyer is, right? A lawyer is trained in the law. In America, to get a JD, to get a law degree in America, in our own jurisdiction, right? To get a JD, you have to have an undergraduate before you can get into law school, right? So law school is graduate school for us in America. Law schools are 3 years. I could give you my example. My law school, I went to George Washington University Law School, and it's 3 years to get a degree if you're full time. It's 4 years if you go part time. Some, not all law schools have a part-time program. Like Harvard does not have a part-time program. Columbia University does not have a part-time law program. Um, but schools in DC, virtually all the, apart from Howard, I don't think Howard does not have a part-time law program. But most schools in DC, because this is our nation's capital, right? And so many people are working in government, and it gives them the opportunity to go to law as well at the same time, to go to law school, get a law degree. So, like George Washington University Law School, where I graduated from, it's the oldest law school in DC, in Washington DC, which is America's, the nation's capital. And Georgetown University also has um, a part-time law program as well. And other schools, American University, University of District of Columbia, they have a part-time program. But most of the law schools in America do not have a part-time program. If you go part-time, it's 4 years of study. But if you go full-time, like I did, it's 3 years. You do it in 3 years. And to qualify to get into a law program, law school, you have to first of all have at least a bachelor's degree. You should have graduated with at least a bachelor's degree. So you can't go straight from high school to law school in America. You can't do that. You can't go in with an associate's degree. You can't do that. You need at least a bachelor's degree. At least that means if you have more, a master's degree, an MBA. Like I already had an MBA when I went to law school. I had more than one degree, several degrees. There are people who have PhDs and decide they want to be lawyers, and they go. There are people who have medical doctors. There was a medical doctor in my set, I believe, and they went, they got their MD first and decided they wanted to go to law school, and they went after that. So you need at least a bachelor's degree, and you just don't get it. There's a standard, there's a requirement. People take what's called the LSAT, Law School Admissions Test, right? And basically, it's testing your critical thinking skills. It's testing your reading comprehension, your ability to read, and it's really a test of speed as well, but really your analytical skills. For me, well, let me not get into that, but you're testing the critical, your logic, right? Because logical reasoning is something lawyers use, right? They have to be logical. So it's testing your logical thinking, your critical thinking skills. That's what the LSAT tests, right? So everybody has to take an LSAT. When you have your LSAT score, your letters of recommendation, you have a bachelor's degree, then you can apply to law schools. And if you get in, then you do 3 years of law school, right? You're being trained in the law. And in law school, what you're actually doing is, of course, you're learning under professors, sometimes judges. Like in DC, many judges teach part-time. Like the former he's, he's still an associate justice of the Supreme Court, Thomas. Justice Clarence Thomas, he used to teach in my law school, right? He taught while I was there at George Washington University Law School. He didn't teach me, but he was a teacher there. Uh, so um, so there's several other people, right? I know I had a former director of the ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, who was my teacher. The deputy Attorney General of the U.S. Of the United States taught me uh, while I was there. A former Attorney General of DC taught me. So several different. So there are lots of different people. There are judges there. Fortunately, and there's something called the moot court, right? Many times, many sitting associate justices of SCOTUS, that's the Supreme Court of the United States, have often come. Uh, they often preside over our moot court at George Washington University Law School. That's one of the benefits of um, going to school at George Washington University Law School, because we're in the nation's capital. We're literally walking distance from the Supreme Court, from Congress, from the White House. The White House is actually our neighbor. So you get all these top government officials who want to teach, part time, and they come and they teach there. So obviously, if you're learning from practitioners, right, those are the people who teach law school, then you're becoming an expert, right? You're trained. And that's the way the law school is structured in the United States. We study cases, right? You study cases, use a Socratic method. So your cases, you're studying the opinions, the actual cases of we because it's a federal law school, so we're normally studying the cases of the Supreme Court, right? And you're reading the analysis, how they analyze things. So Supreme Court justices, fortunately, they write opinions, right? And so you're analyzing their cases, the opinion, how things went. You're analyzing their holding, the ruling. So as you're doing that, you become an expert in doing that. Once you do it for 3 years, and of course you take a practical. So you do a practical. Everybody has to do that before they graduate. So you're pretending like you're a lawyer. Part of your the curriculum at GW was to go and actually watch uh, cases in court. Apart from that, every time you're out of school during the summer, so we have several summers. You have at least 2 summers, right, while you're in law school. Those summers, you're supposed to use them to go and get practical experience, right? You go and work at a law firm or you go and work in government. I was lucky for my own, I got to do a judicial intern. Ironically, in the very court that's charged, where I've been charged with false crimes, right? I've been charged with false crimes in order to obstruct justice. That's Montgomery County uh, Circuit Court, Maryland. I was actually a judicial intern there to Honorable Judge John Maloney in the spring of 2019. I was a judicial intern. And then for summer, I worked in a boutique law firm, right? So you get practical training, right, before you graduate. And of course, you become an expert in analyzing the law, and then you write case briefs. That's part of what you're going to be doing. You're going to write case briefs. You're going to do all of those things. So you get the training, right, of of the law. So basically that's what a JD is. A Juris Doctor. You graduate after 3 years. Of course, if you pass all your exams, you graduate. So a Juris Doctor is somebody who has uh, received a Juris Doctor degree. They're trained in the law. By the way, Juris Doctor also means Doctor of Law. So you graduated, you have that degree, you're trained in the law. Now, people think there's a completion process in becoming a lawyer, right, in America. Uh, After you graduate, right, there's a bar exam that you take, right, typically, and this is where we get into becoming the difference between a lawyer and an attorney. Now, the people who might graduate with a JD, if they don't take this bar exam, right, can they still get jobs? They're jobs, right? They're jobs they can do. They can work. There's many people who go into law school, by the way, already had maybe they had a degree, a prior profession, so they can work in a corporation, right? And they could be legal advisors. They haven't taken the bar, right? They base or doing research. Basically, they're doing research, legal analysis. What they've been doing in law school, right? What they've mastered. They're doing research, research. They're analyzing contracts, or they're doing analyzing regulations, rules, compliance for a corporation, right? Or many right away, what they go and do is they go and work as a law clerk for a judge. You can go and work for a law clerk for a judge. This is a very attractive position. It's not lucrative, but it enhances your trading. Now you don't need the bar, and I'm going to get into that soon, to work as a law clerk for a judge or a justice. So you notice that when they're confirming, if anybody's ever watched the confirmation of a Supreme Court justice, like Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the most recent, you notice that they emphasize on which Court justice she clerked for, right? So she had clerked for the justice she was replacing, Justice Breyer, right? So uh, right after law school, right? Graduates of a JD, they don't have the bar exam yet. They go and many can get fortunate and go and work in a court, right, as a law clerk for a judge. Many times, so they're analyzing the judge's opinions. Many times they can help write the opinion for the judge. So it's great trading. It's normally 1 year. There's a limited time, right, that you can use to work for a judge as a law clerk. Maybe 1 year. Some do 2 years. Some very rarely 3 years. Because the idea is to give new graduates of law school an opportunity to learn to trade, right, from a judge to just learn. That has nothing to do with you uh, passing the bar exam or getting licensed. It has nothing to do with that. Well, it depends as a qualifier. So uh, that's that's one of the positions you can have with a JD, right? You have a Juris Doctor degree, you're a lawyer, you're not an attorney. You can clerk for a judge, right, at a court, right? So it's an attractive position uh, for legal professionals to have, but it's a term limited. It has a limited uh, uh, term period. There's an expiration date for your tenure as a law clerk, right? Typically 1 to 2 years, right? And so the judges want to have new, fresh graduates because there's a lot of innovation, right, that goes on in law school. You learn the latest ideas and latest approach to law, right? Legal ideas and things like that. So that's I'm going to stop there for what a lawyer is, and I'll explain what an attorney is now. So you've graduated with your law degree. You cannot represent anybody in court, right? So if you want to be able to represent people in court, you take the bar exam, and that's uniform. So each state has its own distinct court. Each state has its court system because courts are under the what's called the jurisdiction, right? A jurisdiction is the legal entity of a sovereign political authority, a sovereign government, right? For instance, there's a state and there's federal, or different nations, right? They each have their their distinct jurisdiction, right? The laws in England are different from the laws in the United States. The laws in the United States are different from the laws in Nigeria, and they have different jurisdiction. They also have different ways to qualify their lawyers, right? So you see, lawyer is a huge umbrella term. Like uh, the lawyers, like in England, the lawyers are not called attorneys, right? Those who practice law in courts, they're not called attorneys. They have like at least a two-tiered system. They have solicitors and they have barristers. And I'll get into the explanation later on once I finished my explanation of what an attorney is. So an attorney takes the bar exam. There's a bar exam that law students normally register for in America after they've graduated from law school. People normally graduate from law school in America in the summer, maybe May. I graduated May, right? Uh, that was some years ago. May was the period I graduated. So right about now, there are people who are going to be graduating from law school. After that, people take 3 months to take the bar exam. It's typically in July, right? The bar exam. So in July, depends on what state you want to practice, right? There are 50 states in America. Each state has its court system. So we have what's called the uniform bar exam. So if you want to take the bar, if you want to become a practicing attorney in New York, then you're going to apply to New York. You're going to go through the process. You're going to get the books, and then you register. Typically, they're twice. I think the bar exam is taken twice a year. July and February. July is the big one, right? Most people take July because it's right after they graduated from law school. The studies are still fresh in their minds. So you register. If you want to take it in New York, for instance, you travel to New York. It's a long process. It's a 2-day exam. So it's 3 months to study. You graduate in May, you take it in July. So you see, that's like a 3 months. You have 3 months to study, right? July, barely 3 months, less than 3 months to study, right? So people study intensely. It's not what you did in your third year. Ironically, it's what you did in your first year of law school. So all states do the same thing. The first year of law school, all law schools teach in America, teach basically the same things, right? They teach criminal law, criminal procedure, torts, contracts, constitutional law. That's basically it, right? Those are the things that law schools teach the first year of law school. Maybe one or the other few things. Do they teach tax? No, you see, it's been so long, I don't even remember it all. But those are the basic things that you learn in your first year of law school. And you're going to take that first year of law school, those classes, it's the basics, right? You're going to take it after you graduate on a bar exam, right? It depends on, it's not your school that's giving you that exam, right? So you have the JD, you're qualified, you're now a lawyer, right? You're not an attorney. And I'll explain from the etymology. An attorney is it's derived from French or Latin. It means someone is an agent, right? You're an agent of somebody else. You're assigned, you're appointed to represent someone in court, right? Attorney from the French, or turn to, right? Turn to, you're turning to someone, right? To represent, you act as an agent in court, right? In a court proceeding. So once you take that exam, whichever state you want to take it in, it's a 2-day exam. Once you take it, it takes a while. Then you know if you passed it. Once you pass it, right? Once you pass the exam, then the court, it goes through the court system. They inform the court, right? The court of that state, where you sat the exam. They'll inform you. Then there'll be a day when you go in to be sworn in as an attorney and an officer of the court, and they'll give you a license. You get a bar license. It's a number. It's unique to you. It's your bar license to represent people in court. So you're now an officer of the courts. See, that's the difference. A lawyer who just got their JD, they're not an officer of the courts. They're not licensed to represent anybody in court. They can't do that, right? So they will be practicing. There's a crime for that, right? Practicing law without a license. So you can't appear in court on behalf of anybody, right? If you've not, as an attorney, you can't do that if you have not taken the bar, passed it, and then been sworn in at a court, whichever court you want to practice in. You see, so all those lawyers who practice in court, after they passed the bar, right, they took an oath and they were sworn in at a court, and they became officers of the court. So an attorney is actually an officer of the courts, right? So they go through a process. After they pass the exam, they have a character and fitness test. Part of the exam also is, there's another exam they'll take that has to do with professional ethics, right? So you take the professional ethics exam, right, to be an attorney, because there's now a code of ethics, legal professional code of ethics you have to live by. You practice by this code of ethics, and if you fail the code of ethics, if you do not abide by the rules, you will be disbarred, you can be sanctioned, you lose your bar license, right? So you can't represent people in courts, right? You can't represent anybody in court. I see this is very significant. So that's the difference between an attorney and a lawyer. So an attorney is an officer of the court. They can go to court and represent a client, right? They're assigned. They can represent people, in court. And the etymology will show you the distinction, right? Attorney came into the English language from Old French, Norman French, from Latin. That means one you turn to, attorney, French attorney, one you turn to, one who is assigned or appointed to represent someone in a court proceeding. So attorneys are licensed, they're officers of the court, they're dealing with the court, very specific thing that they're doing, they're dealing with the court. They can do other things as well, right? Again, remember, they can do other things. They're trained in the law, like lawyers are. They're trained in the law, but now they can represent someone in court, right? So, while on the other hand, lawyer is from Old Norse language, the Old Norse language of the Viking era. It comes from the word lag, right? Lag means to lay down, lag or lagu if it's plural. Lag, to lay down, something that's fixed. So you see, till today, the notion of the law, laying down the law, so it's derived from Old Norse, from the Viking era which came into the English language. So by law, uh, you know, by means town. During the Danish era, there was a Dane law period of England. So back then, the Norse, the legal, the law was legal system was very important in the society of the Norse people, the Scandinavians, right? And whom you, of course, are ancestors of the English. They're invaders at a certain time, right? 10th century, the 9th century, different periods, AD, when they came into England. And so laws were very important to them, and they had these things evolved into rules and regulations. So they had a practice of having assemblies, right, in which they laid down the law, and there was a law speaker, somebody who spoke, and they called that person law speaker. And you can see that in even in our present era, right, like Congress, right? So you see our Congress people, majority of them are lawyers, right? People in our Congress are lawmakers. Majority of them are lawyers. Our senators, majority of them are lawyers, but they're not arguing in court, right? They're just creating rules and regulations for us. So you see, that's another thing that lawyers do. And so that's the idea of the notion of the lawyer, right? It comes from laying down the law, something that's fixed, ordered society, right? Laying down rules, laying down the law. And then it evolved in the English language, Middle English. Lawyer came to be known as someone who was trained in the law, an expert in the law, a teacher of the law, right? An advisor, but had nothing to do with someone being in court, right? So those are the two distinct meanings, right, of the term lawyer and attorney, right? And if we consider, again, it also is a matter of jurisdiction, right? These terms mean different things. In America, those are the terms we use: attorney and lawyer. We don't use barristers, right? We don't have barristers in America. In the United Kingdom, right? In the UK, England, they use barristers. They have a two-tier system. Now, they have a different process in qualifying lawyers, right? Um, if you can go from secondary school, high school, what we call high school, right? Call them secondary school in English, speaking systems. Um, they go straight from high school into university and study law directly, which you can't do in America, right? You can't go directly from high school to law school in America. You have to get a bachelor's degree, at least, first of all, an undergraduate degree. But in England, law school is a bachelor's degree. They don't have, the law. So it's a different system. You go to university, you can get a law degree, bachelor's in law, right? And after that, then you now go to what's called an inn, which is like a vocational training. You go to an inn of court. They have degrees in the Middle Temple, what else? Lincoln. So they have these inns of court where they get vocational training to become a lawyer. In fact, you don't have to get a bachelor's in law in England to qualify as a lawyer, as a barrister. Main thing is they go after they have a degree, some kind of undergraduate degree. They go to this inn. It's called an inn of court, and they go through vocational training, and then they take their qualified exams to become barristers, to become barristers. By the way, a barrister in England is someone who does more complex advocacy, right? And they could do it at the highest level of the court. They argue in court. The solicitor is, as the term comes about, as the term, denotes, they solicit the client. They deal with negotiating, preparing for the case, and they refer they solicit the barrister to argue more complex, higher level cases at the highest levels of the court, right? So they're different. I'm not going to get into the weeds with that. And the same thing uh, in Nigeria, right? Nigeria, law is, in order to qualify as a lawyer, you graduate from high school, you go straight to university, and then you start studying the law. So it's a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Laws, and it's 5 years. So it's LLB, Bachelor of Laws. It's 5 years. After they graduate from the university with a Bachelor of Law, they're not yet qualified. They have to now go to get admission to a law school, right? The Nigerian law school. And back then, when I was growing up, there was just one Nigerian law school. All the universities, there are many universities all over the nation. So they go to, but now I think there are at least two or three uh, Nigerian law schools. So it's national, right? And depending on which of the law schools you get into, you have to have that bachelor's in law. Then you now go for what's like an 11-month training. It's an 11-month vocational training in law, practical. You're doing the practical aspect of it. It's about 11 months, so 1 year. So it takes about 6 years for you to qualify. And then you're called to the bar. Once you pass out of Nigerian law school, you're called to the bar and you're now a barrister at law, right? Just like they call them in England. They're not called attorneys in Nigeria, they're called barristers. And they pretty much do all the things our attorneys do. They argue in court, they do all of these things. Now, the thing is, lawyers do not, working in court, not everybody goes to court, not everybody's interested in court. Going to court is not the only thing that lawyers do. Lawyers can work in corporations, they can do a number of things. They can do compliance, counsel. There are many different things that they could do. But of course, everybody who graduates from law school wants to be an attorney, wants to be an officer of the court. Because importantly, once you're an officer of the court, right, you are able to be disciplined, right? The bar can discipline you, and the public knows if you're in good standing or not. Because there are people who do things that are not proper. If you do things that are not proper, then you'll be disbarred. You won't be an attorney anymore. So typically, everybody who graduates from law school in America wants to become an attorney, right? So they want to take the bar. They want to be called to. They want to be an officer of the court because they're going to go through a character and fitness test as well. There are many different processes, right? Because it's not just taking the bar exam. There are many different things that are going to go on, right? The character and fitness test, because there's certain people, criminals cannot be qualified as attorneys, right? So that's where it's very important, right? That people who are lawyers in America want to also be attorneys. They want to go through that process, right? Just to be able to show to the public as well that, well, they're of good character, they're attorneys they're officers of the court, and they can represent clients. And of course, it's bigger money because as an attorneys, right, attorneys can charge their clients a fee because they're representing their clients. They're representing other people. They're acting as agents of other people in court. Court has to do with disputes, right? So there's a dispute in court. There are two parties. If you're an attorney, you can represent a party and argue their case. You can file motions, briefs on behalf of a client, and you charge a fee. Typically, they can even charge whatever they want, right? And a court will honor them. But if you're just a lawyer, just graduated from law school, you can't charge anybody a fee because you gave them advice. You'll be charged with practicing law without a license, right? Because again, there's a bar. A bar has to be able to discipline you to make sure that you followed the proper rules because there are rules, right, to practicing as an attorney. I wanted to get into also discussing Mandela because it's kind of interesting. So Mandela was an attorney. He was not yet an advocate. He didn't become an advocate. That's the highest level of the system in the South African jurisdiction, right? So you see, an attorney was the lowest level of being a lawyer, right, in South Africa. And Mandela did that. He qualified as an attorney. He practiced, represented people. But because he didn't have a law degree yet, he was not able to qualify as an advocate. But he did later on, after 46 years after he had first registered to be in law school, right? He qualified in 1989. He was over 60. It was, I think, 1989 89. In fact, he was over 70 years old when he became an advocate. He qualified as an advocate. He got his LLB and qualified as an advocate. His LLB, he got it from University of South Africa. So while he was in prison, um, I'll do a little video and discuss that. I want to keep this video. I'm going to stop this video now. It's really not short, but hopefully I've provided the distinction, the difference between a lawyer and an attorney. My name is Oluro Timosha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.